This time, we're going deep into the world of Operation Paperclip. We're talking Cold War secrets, spies, scientists, the whole shebang.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild story. We've got this declassified CIA document, and let me tell you, it's a doozy.
What's the historical backdrop here?
Well, picture this 1949, right in the thick of the Cold War. The U.S. and the Soviet Union are locked in this intense rivalry.
Right, that whole my nuke is bigger than yours kind of vibe.
Exactly. And they're both desperate to get any edge they can. So this document pops up at the CIA. It's a critical list of Austrian scientists.
Austrian scientists. Why Austrian specifically?
Well, Austria was this neutral zone after the war.
So a prime hunting ground for talent.
Exactly. These scientists, they had expertise in rocketry, nuclear physics, radar, all sorts of cutting-edge fields. The U.S. wanted to make sure these guys didn't end up working for the Soviets.
Okay, so that's the who and the where. What about the why? Why was this list so critical, as they called it?
Because it was all about preventing a brain drain. Imagine the Soviets getting their hands on these brilliant minds. It could have tipped the scales of the Cold War.
Right, talk about a nightmare scenario for the U.S.
So the U.S. launched Operation Paperclip, this secret program to recruit German scientists.
How?
Well, a lot of these scientists had ties to the Nazi Party. Some were full-blown members, others, well, let's say they weren't exactly resisting the regime.
So the U.S. was willing to work with former Nazis. I mean, I get that it was the Cold War, but still.
It was a moral tightrope walk, for sure, balancing the potential for scientific progress with the very real concern of working with individuals who might have been complicit in war crimes.
Yeah, talk about a dilemma. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm definitely hooked now. So let's meet some of these figures, these scientists who were caught in the middle of this Cold War tug of war. One name that really jumps out is Dr. Engelbert Kola. This guy headed a section of the Austrian Ministry for Power, even worked on splitting the atom with a Professor Fritz Paneth in England. Pretty impressive credentials.
Yeah, he was a top-tier scientist, no doubt. But here's where it gets interesting. The document describes him as both a Zionist and a communist, teaching at a Jewish school in Vienna, but also writing for the Austrian Chemists Association.
Wow, that's quite a mix. You don't see that every day, especially back then.
It makes you wonder how he managed to navigate those seemingly opposing ideologies. Did he face suspicion from either side, or did he somehow manage to find common ground? It's a fascinating glimpse into the personal struggles of these scientists as they try to rebuild their lives after the war.
Absolutely. So we've got a scientist who's both a Zionist and a communist. Who else is on this list of intriguing figures?
Well, there's Dr. Insalford Prowl. Now, this guy was a nuclear physicist who actually discovered 7 new radioactive elements. Talk about a rock star in the world of science.
7? Wow, that's incredible. No wonder everyone was after him.
Right, and it seems everyone was. He served as a German officer in Yugoslavia and Russia during the war, and the document says he claimed to have a comprehensive understanding of the, quote, overall Russian scientific picture. He was contacted by the Americans, the British, the French, even the Russians themselves. Everyone wanted a piece of Dr. Prowl.
He was a man in high demand. Sounds like something out of a spy thriller.
It really does. And to add to the drama, Prowl actually complained about how the Americans were treating him. Said he was willing to cooperate, but only if they met certain conditions.
Ooh, mysterious. What kind of conditions are we talking about? What secrets about the Russian scientific program was he holding on to? It's like every detail in this document just raises more questions.
And that's what makes it so fascinating. It's not just a dry historical record, it's a puzzle box filled with clues and tantalizing hints, urging us to dig deeper and piece together the bigger picture.
A Cold War puzzle box. I love it. So we've got a communist scientist and a nuclear physicist playing both sides.
A stateless engineer.
Stateless? Was he like a refugee or something?
It's unclear. Maybe he was fleeing conflict, maybe persecution. But it definitely makes you wonder how he ended up on the U.S. intelligence radar.
It's like a classic Cold War dilemma, right? Trying to figure out who to trust, who to be suspicious of.
Exactly. And that theme of balancing, of weighing someone's value against potential risks, it comes up again with Dr. Otto Deutschbein. This guy, he worked on developing screens for those old braun tubes, the ones you might remember from your grandparents' TV.
Oh yeah, those big, bulky things. What did he do with those?
His work focused on boosting the light intensity and, get this, distinguishing moving objects. Think about the implications of that, especially in the context of radar and surveillance.
This is technology with serious military potential.
But there's a catch. The document states that Deutschbein was a member of the Nazi Party. It brings us back to that core ethical question that hangs over all of Operation Paperclip. How did the U.S. reconcile the scientific brilliance of these individuals with their potential complicity in the horrors of the Nazi regime?
It's a tough one. Was it a case of the ends justify the means? Were they willing to overlook a dark past in the name of winning the Cold War?
It's hard to say for sure. The document doesn't really delve into the moral calculus behind those decisions, but it definitely gives us something to think about. And to add another layer of intrigue, exactly, it really highlights the secrecy that shrouded Operation Paperclip, the lengths the government went to protect certain information even decades after the war. Who were these individuals? Were they deemed too dangerous? Or were their identities protected for other reasons? It's a historical mystery just waiting to be solved.
A mystery within a mystery. Okay, why should any of this matter to me? What's the lasting impact of Operation Paperclip?
Well, on a practical level, it had a huge impact on the development of science and technology in the U.S. Many of these recruited scientists played key roles in things like the space race, the development of new weapon systems, advancements in fields like medicine and engineering.
So we're talking about like the foundations of some of the most significant technological advancements of the 20th century.
It's true, but beyond the practical side of things, Operation Paperclip raises some really important ethical questions that are still relevant today. Questions about how we balance the pursuit of knowledge and progress with our moral compass. Is it ever okay to compromise our values in the name of national security or scientific advancement?
It's a question we're still grappling with, especially in the world where technology seems to be advancing at warp speed. This document is like a time capsule, reminding us that progress often comes with complicated choices and consequences.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And it highlights the complex relationship between science and politics, showing how scientific research can be used for good and for not so good purposes. Operation Paperclip wasn't just about rockets and radar. It was about the human stories behind those advancements, the choices people made, and the ripple effects that continue to be felt today.
Okay, let's get back to some of those fascinating personal stories. This Dr. Erwin Fisher Colbury caught my eye. He was working on something called tube electrometers, or proportional amplifiers. Now, I'm not a physicist.
Basically, he was working on technology that amplified weak electrical signals. Imagine you're trying to hear a whisper in a noisy room. An amplifier boosts that signal, making it much clearer.
Ah, got it. So why was that a big deal?
This kind of signal amplification had a ton of applications, from making scientific instruments better to potentially enhancing things like radar systems.
I see. And the fact that his work was highlighted in a book by another prominent nuclear physicist suggests he was operating in a pretty elite scientific circle.
And it hints that his research might have been connected to the wider world of atomic science and the race for nuclear dominance. And remember, this list, it's just a small sliver of Operation Paperclip. The full program involved scientists and engineers from all over Germany and occupied Europe.
Wow, the scale of it all is mind-boggling. It makes you wonder how much of the Cold War was shaped by these behind-the-scenes scientific efforts.
It's a fascinating question to ponder. And this document, it gives us a peek behind that curtain, letting us piece together the human stories and the scientific advancements that defined an era.
Okay, I'm curious about this, Dr. Karl Dusek. The document says he was a pioneer in the field of ultrasonic diagnosis and therapy, especially for brain tumors. Sounds like a real medical hero.
He was definitely a visionary in his field, yeah. But there's a bit of a twist. He also served as a flight surgeon with the Luftwaffe, the Nazi Air Force.
Hold on, a Nazi flight surgeon making groundbreaking medical discoveries? That's a lot to unpack.
It gets even more complicated. The document says he was actually denied membership in the Nazi Party because they considered him politically unreliable.
Seriously.
Yeah.
So even within the Nazi ranks, there were like dissenters and internal conflicts. What do you think he might have done to earn that label?
It's impossible to say for sure, but it definitely opens up a whole can of worms, right? Was he secretly opposed to Nazi ideology? Or was he just, too independent-minded for their liking? The document doesn't give us the answers, but it paints this this intriguing portrait of a complex individual caught in the whirlwind of history.
It's a reminder that behind every name on this list is a whole life story filled with personal beliefs, professional ambitions, and the often turbulent historical forces of the time. Okay, one more name before we move on. This Professor Dr. Felix Ehrenhaft sounds like quite a character. So tell me about this Professor Ehrenhaft.
Well, he was a bit of a controversial figure, brilliant, but also kind of a thorn in the side of the scientific establishment. The document says he was the guy who discovered Brownian motion principles, but applied to gases.
Brownian motion, huh? I vaguely remember that from science club. What was that again?
So imagine you've got these tiny particles like dust motes just dancing around randomly in the air. That's Brownian motion. And Ehrenhaft's work, it helped us understand how this phenomenon works in gases. But despite his contributions, he was, quote, most unpopular in the scientific world because of egotism.
Oh, so maybe a bit of a mad scientist personality, like brilliant, but not exactly easy to get along with.
It seems that way. And here's another interesting tidbit. He emigrated to the U.S. in 1938, but then went back to Vienna after the war. And get this, he was appointed director of the I-Physics Institute at the University of Vienna, all thanks to the influence of Foreign Minister Gruber.
Wow, so even with his prickly personality, he still had some powerful friends in high places. What was he working on back in Vienna?
The document says he was, quote, now engaged in research on his theory of pure or single magnetic currents. And it even claims that if his theory was proven true, quote, it would revolutionize scientific research.
Okay, so potentially groundbreaking stuff. But if the intelligence community had already labeled him as, quote, of no interest, why even bother mentioning this research?
That's a good question. Maybe they were just trying to be thorough, providing a complete picture of his work, or maybe there was something more to his research than they initially realized. Remember, this document, it was created during a time of intense scientific competition, so even seemingly small details could have had strategic value.
So they were maybe keeping an eye on him, just in case his research turned out to be more important than they thought.
It's certainly possible. It's easy to forget how much we don't know. Even with these declassified documents, there are always layers of context and motivation that we can only speculate about.
True. Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive, there's one more scientist I wanted to ask about. Professor Dr. Gustav F. Hüdig. What can you tell me about him?
Hüdig was an inorganic and physical chemist, taught at universities in Prague and Germany, and the document specifically mentions that he was listed in, quote, National Scientific Intelligence Requirements, Nuclear Energy, USSR. So clearly someone they were paying close attention to.
Nuclear energy in the USSR, huh? It definitely sounds like a recipe for some Cold War intrigue.
Oh, absolutely. And Hüdig's travels, they just add to the mystery. He was a guest of the USSR in 1934, giving lectures in major cities like Leningrad, Moscow, Kharkov, and Kiev. But then just a couple of years later, he was a guest of the U.S.
Whoa, so he was like rubbing shoulders with both superpowers, almost like he was playing both sides.
Right. He seemed to be quite comfortable moving in those international scientific circles. Makes you wonder, was he sharing knowledge and expertise with both the U.S. and the USSR? Was he a double agent or just a brilliant scientist caught in the middle of this global power struggle?
And to make things even more interesting, the document mentions that he was a specialist in, quote, thermomagnetic substances for use in radar camouflage.
Ah, yes. That detail really underscores how seemingly esoteric scientific research could have significant military applications. Radar camouflage, it was and still is a highly sought after technology, especially during the Cold War.
No wonder he was on their radar, literally.
Exactly. And his connections to both the US and the USSR, they just make his story all the more intriguing. It's a perfect example of how Operation Paperclip wasn't just about recruiting scientists, but also about denying that knowledge and those skills to potential enemies.
Makes sense. Okay, last but not least, tell me about Dr. Ing. Alfred Vogelbauer. His name came up earlier, and I'm curious to know more.
Vogelbauer was a pioneer in aircraft manufacturing. He developed this thing called the double T welding method. It was a significant innovation that really cut down the time and cost of producing airframe assembly members. Imagine trying to build airplanes faster and more efficiently, especially during a time when global conflict was a real possibility. His work was essential.
So another example of how technical advancements played a crucial role in the bigger picture of the Cold War.
Absolutely. What's interesting about Wugerbauer's story is that the document says that both the Ordnance and Air Corps wanted to recruit him through Operation Paperclip, but he turned them down.
He rejected the U.S. Why would he do that?
We can only speculate. Maybe he had personal reasons for wanting to stay in Austria, or maybe he just didn't trust the U.S. government.
Or maybe he had other offers. Maybe the Soviets were trying to recruit him as well.
It's definitely possible. Unfortunately, the document doesn't say why he declined. But those unanswered questions, they're part of what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating, right?
His whole Operation Paperclip document has been like peering into a hidden world, uncovering all these tangled threads of science, politics, ambition, all playing out during one of the most consequential periods in modern history. We've got scientific breakthroughs, moral compromises, international espionage, and mysteries that might never be fully solved. It's incredible.
It truly is. And it leaves us with a lot to think about. Was Operation Paperclip a necessary evil, a gamble the U.S. had to take to win the Cold War? Or was it a step too far, a moral compromise that shouldn't have been made?
Tough questions. No easy answers. But that's what makes history so compelling, right? It's not just about dates and facts. It's about the choices people made, the consequences of those choices, and the ripple effects that continue to shape our world today.
Couldn't agree more. And for anyone listening who wants to learn more, there are tons of books and articles out there about Operation Paperclip. Each one offers a different perspective on this incredibly controversial chapter in history.
So do your own digging, folks. Explore those individual stories, those moral dilemmas, those scientific advancements, and then form your own conclusions about the legacy of Operation Paperclip and its impact on the world we live in today. Because this history lesson is far from over.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the secrets of Operation Paperclip. Until next time.